House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 1955, an act relating to state government establishing a budget for the Department of Agriculture. The Senate has repassed said bill in accordance with the recommendations of the report of the Conference Committee. The message is signed Thomas S. Bahner, Secretary of the Senate. The report is addressed to the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate, the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File number 1955, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 2 out of the 3 members on the part of the Senate and 2 of the 3 members on the part of the House. Vang moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 1955 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion that I encourage members to adopt the report, and in the next discussion, I can talk about the bill.
Any discussion on the motion? On the motion, Representative Anderson from Pope County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would move that the House refuse to adopt the report of the Conference Committee on the Senate File 1955 and that bill be returned to the Conference Committee. As we've heard before, as we wind up the session, that this Conference Committee didn't see a lot of the light of day either, like some of the other committees. We met once, I think the previous Monday, and then we're called back on Saturday to sign the report, to look at the report, and it was done. So some good things in the bill, but just concerned that there should have been more activity by the entire Conference Committee. So because of that, Madam Speaker, I would move that the bill be returned to the Conference Committee.
Seeing no discussion on the motion, all those in favor of the motion to refuse to adopt, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail. We are on adoption of the Conference Committee report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File number 1955, as amended by conference.
3rd reading as amended by conference. Discussion to the report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a good, well-rounded agriculture and broadband bill. The largest investment we make on the Ag Bill is establishing a grain indemnity fund with one-time funding of $10 million. This will protect grain producers and keep them afloat should there be a grain elevator failure. We heard time and time again from farmers who have been financially devastated by elevator collapses. After years of discussion and continued hardship experienced by farm families year over year, this will finally provide meaningful protection to producers who sell grain in Minnesota. Broadly, this is important because when farmers sell grain to an elevator, they often don't collect payment right away. And in fact, they're extending credit to their elevator. We also make strong historic investments in emerging farmers. 99% of farmers are white, and as chair of the Agriculture Committee, I represent generations of farmers that have been left out. This bill will expand the Emerging Farmers Office to be able to service farmers with the greatest barriers towards land access, financial access, market access, and access to resources provided by the state. We also make continued investments. We know there have been long-time good programs of the state, such as Farm to School, Good Food Access, Urban Ag, and so on. When we talk about farming, we must also address being good stewards of the land. We look at how to protect pollinators and protect soil health. The state makes strong investments in the Soil Health Financial Assistance Program that will enable farmers to become better stewards of the land and invest in equipment and cover crops that will benefit the farmer economically and sustainably. Members, I can't say enough how many good things we have in this bill that are good for farmers, for our land, and for agriculture. There are also hot button issues we talked with the Senate and have reached agreement on. One is regarding the Board of Animal Health. They do a great job in protecting the state from animal diseases, especially since last year on high-path avian influenza. We also heard from other issues that needs further addressing, such as companion animal welfare and CWD, and we've reached an agreement to add a board member who needs to be a companion animal veterinarian. PFAS was also a hot button issue. These forever chemicals accumulate over time, and for our public health, we must continue to protect human health. Farmers utilize many of these chemicals, and this would allow MDA to work on pesticide safety and regulation under their authority given by the EPA. Mr. Speaker, these are the provisions within the bill, and I ask members for your support.
Is there any further discussion to the repassage of Senate File 1955? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not very often I get up and speak to the Ag bill, but I do have a couple of questions. If the chair would, with Representative Yang, would yield.
Representative Vang, will you yield to a question? She will yield, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Vang, I want to bring your attention to page 36, lines 10 through 14. I'll give you a second to find that. And this has to do with data sharing between agencies. The new language there, as you can see in the subtitle, they've added delegation and data sharing to approved agencies. And then it says the commissioner may enter into data sharing agreements with other state agencies to help assess the potential for unreasonable adverse effects to human health and the environment and the use of pesticides. So I'm wondering if you could share with me if there's somewhere in statute other than right here where it's laid out what data sets are being collected, and then how would that data be classified? They're sharing it back and forth. Just wonder if there's another reference in statute that you might know about since this is government-created data.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, this provision is, to look at to encourage state agencies, this is regarding the PFAS language that we're talking about. In the environment bill, there's also some references to PFAS and how to regulate some of these products containing PFAS, and MPCA has some of that authority, and so MDA, the Department of Agriculture, has authority under pesticides, and so this is just to clarify and ensure that there's no duplication between the two agencies.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. There's similar language on page 42 as well, and it pertains to fertilizer, I believe. So we've got these applications of data sharing for pesticides and for fertilizers. And so what I'm assuming, since there's no reference here to Chapter 13, what I'm assuming is any of this data that's collected and shared is presumed to be public, because all data is presumed to be public unless it's classified otherwise. So would that be your understanding if she would yield to that question, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker?
Representative Vang, will you yield to a question? She will yield, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Scott, I believe this data is just to encourage two agencies to make sure that registrants who have these types of products are able to work with one agency rather than with both agencies. And so I believe this is something that the agency will be best suited to answer this question.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Vang, you just brought up something that I hadn't even read into this. Would you yield to another question, please?
She will yield to another question, Representative Scott.
Thank you. So will this data that's being shared, will it contain names and addresses of farmers or others that are using, in this case, well, either pesticides or fertilizers that have some ingredient of PFAS in it?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, I would just say that when this will be onerous on the company to already provide data that's already being provided to the agency currently. And so this is just to specify whether they have PFAS-containing ingredients within the products. So we're not changing how the data is being collected.
Representative Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my understanding then is this is the manufacturer that's going to be reporting this information if their product contains PFAS. And then the agencies, the government agencies, will be able to share that amongst one another. So would it be your understanding that if I wanted to see some of that data from that manufacturer that's flowing back and forth between these agencies, if I wanted to see if they shared, the Department of Ag shared that information with the Department of Health, I would be able to have access to the data that was shared, and with whom, if she would yield to that question?
Representative Vang will yield. Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, I think I will defer this to the Chair of Environment Committee, Representative Hansen, who can best answer this question as he has a much more extensive language on PFAS.
Representative Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm happy to ask the Chair of the Environment Committee to yield to that question, if he
You
would.
will yield. Representative Scott. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Scott. And I was a little late catching the flow here, but I want to kind of go a little bit into the authorities question on who does what in this. So the registration of a pesticide authority rests with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and that authority is delegated from US EPA, and US EPA registers the pesticide, and there's a registration number that goes with that. So looking at the approved agencies, the commissioner here is the Commissioner of Agriculture, and so what we've determined in the both general public and then also a scientific literature is that there are some pesticides that have PFAS in them, whether it's intentionally added as part of the active ingredient or whether it's an inert ingredient. So the authority on the registration of the pesticide rests with the Department of Agriculture. However, PFAS, how you deal with PFAS, whether it's a variety of the PFAS components, maybe with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and if you had an incident, let's say that I was exposed to a pesticide that had PFAS in it, and I may be having an acute response, we may need the Department of Health to look at that health information. So when you look at, the commissioner may, by written agreements, delegate specific inspection, enforcement, and other regulatory duties of this chapter to approved agencies. And then what's being added of the commissioner may enter into data sharing agreements with other agencies to help assess the potential for unreasonable adverse effects on human health. The authority that the Commissioner of Agriculture has is, does the pesticide do what it's supposed to be doing? Is it affecting the pest? The Department of Health may have additional information that by sharing that information with the Department of Health, they're able to provide that information that the Commissioner of Agriculture may not have, or subsequently to the Pollution Control Agency that maybe have additional information on environmental impacts of PFAS. So I think that's the data sharing, how that would occur and why it occurs. If you have an additional question, maybe I can help with that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Chair Hansen. I do have a further clarifying question, because you did mention the example you gave is if you were having an adverse effect to, you thought was maybe as a consequence of exposure to something, a fertilizer or a pesticide with PFAS, and the Department of Ag contacts the Department of Health, and the Department of Health, you've reported to them this incident that you think it's related. Is the Department of Ag then going to have your contact information? Is that kind of some of the data that's going to be going back and forth? Because there's no data classification here, and it seems like there's a lot of data sharing going on. If you would yield to that question.
Representative Hansen will yield to your question. Representative Scott, I recognize Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Scott. I think how that would be handled is under the statute that's being proposed here, that the Commissioner of Agriculture would enter into data sharing agreements with other state agencies. And I don't know if Chair Becker-Finn is on the floor, but those data sharing agreements, there are data sharing agreements that occur elsewhere. I would assume that they need to follow the same requirements for data protection.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. And Representative Hansen and Representative Vang, that's why I'm a little puzzled, because there's no reference to Chapter 13 here, but this is a new section of new lines in statute that's saying that we're going to allow for the sharing of data, and we don't know what data sets are going to be, if there's going to be any personal information. As the example that you gave, if you're having an adverse effect, we don't know if your personal information would then go to the Department of Ag. I'm just a little bit puzzled by the drafting of this, because I don't know what I don't know. And if Representative Hansen would yield to my perplexity here.
Representative Hansen will yield to your question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Scott. So I think the point to look at is the regulatory nexus on when the decision-making occurs. So the Commissioner of Agriculture has the decision whether or not to register that pesticide. And so the registration of the pesticide is with the manufacturer coming to the state of Minnesota, paying a fee, and the Commissioner of Agriculture determines whether they should register that pesticide. In order to make that decision, data may be shared with them, data may be shared by other agencies, whether it's the Pollution Control Agency or the Health Department. I would use those two as an example, on specific inspection, enforcement, or other regulatory duties of the chapter. So the chapter is 18B, the pesticide control law. So using my example that I provided may not be the best example, because that's more an acute response of what was Representative Hansen exposed to. But probably the better example is, here the company is proposing to register the pesticide, and what is the data that they need to make the decision on, does it have an unreasonable adverse effect on health or the environment? And so I think where that comes in, when you have in existing law the specific inspection, enforcement, or other regulatory duties, may help in that decision-making on whether or not to register that pesticide, which may contain PFAS. So you have pesticide X, the registrant says this contains PFAS, whether it was in the active ingredient or the inert ingredient. And so Commissioner of Agriculture has a data sharing agreement with PCA and says, with pesticide X, do you have any records of enforcement action on that particular thing? Do you have something that we can use to make that decision? So it's on the decision-making authority to decide whether or not that pesticide should be sold in the state of Minnesota. I don't know if that helps or not.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Chair Hansen. Yes, that's helpful. If anyone from the Department of Ag or Pollution Control Agency, any of these agencies are listening and they have further clarification, I would love to know more. It sounds like it's at the licensing, at the time that it's approved to be licensed or used in the state of Minnesota. I just want to make sure there's no personal information, and that Minnesotans can get access to this information, assuming that it's public, because it's not classified otherwise. And also concerned that there wouldn't be any proprietary information that's being shared that, for these companies that are the manufacturers. So don't want to belabor this, but in the future, I hope that if we find out some answers to those questions that are troubling, that we could work on getting something placed there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker and members, I think we're doing committee work on the floor here, and I appreciate the line of questioning from Representative Scott. And it illustrates why we attempted to send this bill back to the committee. This is a fairly complex and difficult topic to understand, especially here on the floor when some of the acoustics are not the greatest. But this was an amendment that was added to the conference committee report with a timestamp of 12:15 on Saturday afternoon, and the committee started its meeting at 2 o'clock. So we had an hour and 45 minutes to study. I think it was a 7-page amendment that replaced some earlier PFAS language in the bill, and we're left here with some very serious questions about confidentiality and such. And again, it's just an example that these conference committees should do their work in conference committee and not here on the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Chair, Vang, will yield for a question.
Representative Vang will yield to a question. Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Vang, I had a constituent that's very much into this cottage food thing. I'm sure you're abundantly aware of who they are. We'll leave names out of it. However, the question I have for you, in this, on page, I believe it's 79, it allows for the shipping of pet treats, but not for all of the products that they make. Can you help me? And today in the Senate, it came up and it was discussed that it was more of a House provision, that it was limited to this. Can you help me understand why this is being limited, more so on the House side and the Senate side, why there is such a concern to not allow it to all?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Meckland, thank you for your question. The short answer is food safety concerns. Right now, cottage food producers, they don't have to go through inspection. They don't have to get licensed. And over the pandemic, they have grown to be 7,000 producers who are cottage food. And the reason why we decided to limit to pet treats is because it won't affect human health. Right now, I think there's still more work to be done on this issue, on this bill. But for now, regarding food safety concerns, that's why we only limit to pet treats, since that cannot affect human health.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if Representative Vang will yield to another question?
She will yield for another question. Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So was this more of like an MDA concern because of the health and safety issues? Can you answer me that?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is also our concern, too.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If she'll continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Meckland.
So Representative Vang, when you said it's also our concern, does that mean it's both the MDA as well as the committee's concern?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Meckland, I think it is also our job to protect public health and safety of our constituents. And so I think this should be everybody's concern.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that, Chair Vang. I guess, it's my understanding that no matter what they make, whether it's for a pet treat or human consumption, they're held to the same safety standard. That is what I was just been informed. I was actually on the phone all the way over here from the State Office building. And however, I will say that I understand putting your foot in the water, but if you hurt my little Fluffy, I'm going to be really, really upset as a guy who spent 4 hours in the emergency care vet in St. Cloud last Sunday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to Senate File 1955. I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Glad to see this conference committee report make this bill a little bit better. At the same time, there's still plenty of concerning provisions inside of this bill. And I just want to take a moment and thank Chair Vang. She traveled across the state seeking input from many people and the people of Minnesota, the farmers across this state. I'm concerned with a lot of the contents of this bill through the lens of the fact that it's off balance balance. It's off kilter to the whole of agriculture in our state, and that's seen in the where the dollars are spent, and huge increases to the Department of Agriculture, and frankly, huge increases to bureaucracy are found within this bill, members, and you know. Even when we have a near $20 billion budget surplus, that doesn't mean we should go about growing government and bureaucracy that makes it more difficult for the Minnesota public to engage with its government and the department. And there's several different sections of this bill that are quite concerning. But I represent an exceedingly rural district filled with many family farms, filled with some emerging farmers in our state. But as I travel across my district and talk to farmers, you know, some in this body might be quite surprised by the amount of times that I hear from farmers saying, gosh, you know, we really need to stay out of people's bedrooms. But inside this bill and the emerging farmer program, it specifically directs the Department of Agriculture to make decisions based upon the decisions that people make inside their bedrooms. It's wrong. It shouldn't be in there. And members, we can help new generations of farmers go to work on the land, providing for food security, but none of it should be determined by what happens within an individual's bedroom. And that's what this bill does. Unnecessary language, and a bill that enhances bureaucracy, makes it more difficult for people who want to farm to work with the state agency, and adds to bureaucracy and costs to the taxpayers across the state. Further, this bill, members, gives authority to the commissioner, of whom is a good friend, and allows any future commissioner to raise fees on their own without legislative approval. This sort of policy shouldn't be pursued in this bill or other budget bills, but yet it's found within this bill right here. So these are several reasons why this body should reject this bill, send it back to conference. We can make it even better. Vote no.
Further discussion to Senate File 1955. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a good bill. We've spent many listening sessions hearing from farmers all across the state. Thank you, Representative Schultz, for hosting us in your district. I also want to thank staff and committee members for all their work on the making of this bill. And you know, I just want to make sure that we pass a good bill. Thank you so much for your support.
I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I thought I was on the list, and again, my apologies for speaking after the bill author. I'm going to rise and say I'm going to vote for the bill, and there are three main reasons I'm going to do that. The first is that we're additionally adding money to the Grain Indemnity Fund. On the House side, it was $5 million. Now it's up to $10 million. That's very important as we get this program jump-started for the farmers of Minnesota. I also appreciate the changes to the language in the Board of Animal Health. When it left here, it was 11 members. Now it's down to going to be 7, with one additional veterinarian named who is a specialist in the companion animals. That's a good feature. And the other part that I especially appreciate is the dropping of the language pertaining to treated seeds in this bill. Again, I'm proud to represent agriculture. Minnesota is 4th in the nation in the production of agricultural products. It's a $110 billion industry. 430,000 jobs resulted from agriculture in this state. It's a great industry. And when I go home and see families on the farm planting and combining and such, see a dairy barn or a hog barn or a turkey barn, it's just good to see that that's happening in Minnesota. So again, Mr. Speaker, I apologize for speaking out of turn, but I just wanted to mention I will be supporting this bill today.
Is there any further discussion of Senate File 1955? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 85 ayes and 44 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate. The following House file herewith returned is amended by the Senate, in which amendments and concurrence the House is respectfully requested. House File Number 1126, an act relating to higher education. The message is signed Thomas S. Bahner, Secretary of the Senate. Pelowski moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 1126 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
I recognize the author of the motion, the member from Winona, Representative Pelowski, to
Mr.
explain the
Speaker,
report.
that is my motion to concur. The Senate made one addition. They added House File 2613. 2613 was heard in the House Higher Education Committee and was passed in the House Higher Education Committee. So I would ask the members to concur with the motion and the passage of the bill.
Is there any discussion to the conference committee report? Excuse me, to the conference committee concurrence. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to concur with the Senate amendments, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File Number 1126, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Is there any further discussion to House File 1126 as amended by the Senate? I recognize the member from Winona, Representative Pelowski.
Mr. Speaker and members, please support the bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 1126 as amended by the Senate. The clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 8 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3288. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 3288, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to claims, the first engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Blue Earth, Representative Frederick, to explain House File 3288.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 3288 is the claims bill for 2023. It's relatively small in size compared to previous years. It has 3 exoneration claims and 3 personal injury claims for about $1.1 million total appropriated.
Is there any further discussion of House File 3288? Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's a good bill, small bill, but it'll do some good. Please vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 3288. Oh, the clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading.
3rd reading, House File Number 3288.
3rd reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on House File 3288. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 85 ayes and 43 nays, the bill is passed in its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1900. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 1900, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to natural resources, proposing an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution, the 2nd engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins, to explain House File 1900.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill for the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. This trust fund has helped fund important projects to conserve our land, air, water, and wildlife across the state of Minnesota for the last 3 decades. It's my honor to carry this bill, and I'm delighted to bring it to the floor today. The fund was created in 1988 with the overwhelming support of voters, and it was rededicated after a decade with also tremendous voter support. And once again, it's time to reauthorize this dedicated funding by putting the question before the voters in 2024. There are a couple of changes that have been made to the bill in this iteration that I would like to describe for you. We have increased the percentage of the fund that may be appropriated from 5.5% to 7%, and this investment returns on the fund are adequate to support this increase without depleting the fund, and increasing the percentage will allow more dollars to get out the door and to fund good projects across the state of Minnesota. Additionally, language has been added to prohibit the use of these funds to pay for wastewater infrastructure. In the past, attempts to utilize this fund to pay bonds for wastewater projects caused controversy and delay in appropriating funds. Research related to wastewater may still be funded through the trust fund, but wastewater infrastructure is more appropriately funded through bonding. Adding this language in the Constitution will prohibit future raids on the trust fund for wastewater projects. And then finally, Article 2 contains statutory changes that add a community grants program in order to create more accessibility for communities and organizations across the state. The community grants program does not change the current LCCMR process or the amounts of funds that the LCCMR recommends. This small grants program will be administered by the DNR and includes an advisory council that will be charged with the task of advising the DNR on developing and improving the grant program to ensure accessibility. There's broad support for this constitutional amendment and statutory community grants program, as you can see from the support letter that will be distributed or may have already been distributed. Over 90 organizations have signed on to support it. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House Bill number 1900, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson, to explain the A9 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The addition of the small grants program to this bill reveals a new way of funding projects across the state. But there's language in here regarding subgrants. It's not clear whether they intend to issue any subgrants, but in the interest of clarity and consistency and accountability, I think it's important that we not do subgrants, that all grants be directly administered and awarded by the DNR. This amendment simply removes the language regarding subgrants to make it perfectly clear that there is no intention to use subgrants as part of this program. I urge members to vote green.
Further discussion to the A9 amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Torkelson. I actually agree. This language was a holdover from boilerplate language that had been used previously when we thought subgrants were going to be a part of the program, but now we're recognizing that's not the best way to administer the funds, and so I would also support a green vote on removing this language, so thank you.
Is there any further discussion to the A9 amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. Please vote green.
All those in favor of adopting the A9 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the A9 amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File number 1900, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson, to explain the A10 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is going so well, I'm thinking I maybe should have worn green today, but I didn't. For those of you that have been here a while, 2020 and earlier, you may remember Gene Wagenius. Gene and I served on environment together, on LCCMR together, and disagreed most of the time. However, she often used the term outcomes, and this is a point where we did agree that the money spent in these programs, whether it be LCCMR or other grant programs, actually result in something important, something that actually has a positive impact on our environment. The language of this amendment simply inserts that language into this community grants program so that it gives us some assurance that once this money is spent, we get some positive outcomes for our environment. Mr. Speaker and members, I urge a green vote.
Further discussion to the A10 amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again, Representative Torkelson, although I'm afraid we're going to not agree on this one. We're going so well. I know. While I do appreciate the efforts, and I think we had a good conversation about this in committee, I'm going to advise my members to vote no on this language, not because I don't think what you're saying is important, but because I think the language that you provided just needs a little bit of tweaking, and because this is statutory in nature, I'm happy to continue working with you to get language right on this and amend it going forward in 2024. So I also would like to note that we can absolutely expect the DNR to have a reporting process on what ends up coming out of these community grant programs. I do truly believe that because a lot of what happens with these trust fund monies is research, a positive outcome is not really a useful descriptor because research doesn't have positive and negative outcomes, it just has outcomes and empirical data. And we really want to have that empirical data. So I want to work on this language with you, Representative Torkelson, and I hope that you will agree to do that with me later. But for now, I would recommend a no vote. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A10 amendment. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since there's a very small issue with this amendment, and I'm sure that the author of the amendment, the author of the bill, could sit down and take care of that now. We could table this bill, take up the next one, and you could come up with an amendment and fix it now. I just have concerns that if we don't fix it now, we might not get to it. And you're so close, it sounds like, on agreement that I'm sure that would happen, but I'm not going to make any motion. I'm just adding that suggestion to the author.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Torkelson. This is a good amendment, and you know, this is a bill that everybody, I think, wants to support. And one of the problems that we have on that side of the aisle is that we just always seem to go just a little bit too far. And, you know, it's not that we're, you know, we can go down the examples of those things, but, you know, this is brand new. We're going to increase the amount of money that we're going to spend in Minnesota by over 20%. That's great. You know, that's great. If that's what we want to do, that's great. But what we're doing, and what's really important, and I'm going to spend a little time in section lines 3.16 to 3.21. If you want to look at the bill, I may have some questions. But, you know, we started out, for example, trying to protect the U of M, and we ended up regulating every health transaction. There has to be some end to what the good is. And this bill and this, you know, this constitutional amendment is supported by 70% of the state of Minnesota. This is great. But when we get down into lines 3.16 to 3.21, I mean, even on the first one, census tracts that are overburdened and underserved. I mean, that's an EPA. That's an EPA designation for environmental justice, which is fine. That's great. But let's just list them. I mean, they're identified in maps, just like a wetland conservation map, just like anything else that we study at a high level. Let's just identify those areas and say, you know what, those are the target areas we're going to go to. We're going to go to Brooklyn Park. We're going to go to Brooklyn Center. We're going to go to North Minneapolis. We're going to go to South Minneapolis. Let's identify those things and be super transparent about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then you get into including communities disproportionately affected by agricultural loss. Now, is that, how long are we going back? Are we going to go back to 1965, Shakopee? Are we going to, building loss, wildfire risk, low incomes, high energy costs, rates of asthma, rates of diabetes? I mean, Minnesota, 8.8% of Minnesotans have diabetes, 390,000 people. They're not all congregated in the environmental justice areas targeted by the EPA. They're all over. So we're trying to carve out literally 22% of new funding for certain areas that predominantly have lost all kinds of diversity. These are high densely populated areas. I don't know a lot of the metro. I know Hennepin. For example, you know, we've got 11 watershed management organizations in watershed districts. They would be eligible for this. I think this is great. That's great that they would be eligible for this increased funding. But they're already doing that work. They're already doing that work, and we're not celebrating that. We're basically saying, now what we want you to do, forget about your comprehensive planning that you're taking up. We want you now to hone in on where the EPA has identified areas that are environmentally unjust. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake. Natural resources, they go far beyond political subdivisions and boundaries of wealth or non-wealth. High housing costs. Does that mean, I don't know where the highest housing costs are. Let's just say the brand new North Loop. I heard those are pretty expensive. Are they gonna be better qualified to receive these dollars than the city of Greenfield? Because it's cheaper? This is so vague, and it reaches so far that it just creates this thing, and I can get into it a little bit at the end of it, but it reaches so far when we're really trying to focus on what are those things that matter. And lack of indoor plumbing. Can we, I don't know, maybe you've got an example of where they don't have indoor plumbing. I think maybe we have one. Presence of lead paint. In Putnam County, we spend millions of dollars to remediate lead paint. Does that mean that Hennepin County is going to be a stronger participant in this process because we invest and we have identified so much lead paint? Would that make Hennepin County better? Proximity to hazardous waste and related facilities. Does that mean that a refuse-derived energy fuel site is gonna score higher? I don't know. This section right here. This section right here it's just wrong. If we're going to increase the amount of money, I wish we'd have had an amendment to get rid of Section 3, because there was nothing wrong with the way that we were doing this before. All of these things that are targeted in this group were eligible for funding before. If we wanted to increase that, you know what, let's partner with those people that are providing those things now. Let's not create a whole new organization where they don't even have any recommendation components. They're literally there to try to advise the commissioner on developing forms and applications, reporting, review proposed grant policies and budgets, propose changes to the grant program, review other relevant information. They're not even being tapped to help decide where those funds are going. Who wants to sit on a committee like that? I wish this is a good amendment, because it basically takes the vagueness of this and puts an outcome that's associated with it that says, you know what, I lost my amendment. We're going to basically take this vague, very open thing, and we're going to focus to make sure that we've got measurable, positive results that protect, conserve, preserve, and enhance the state's air, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. Because that's the constitutional requirement of this funding. This is a no-brainer. This is a good amendment. This doesn't hurt anything. There's nothing to work on. This is a good amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the author of the bill, the member. Is there any further discussion to the A10 amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. Would Representative Hollins yield for a question?
She will yield, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hollins, which committees did this bill get heard in?
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, I believe that it was heard in Environment, Rules, and Ways and Means.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surprisingly, that no accountability language is added in any of those committees. Representative Nadeau brought out some important points here. And the language we're adding, while it may not be, quote, perfect, it surprises me because we've passed a lot of language this session. And I would argue that there are many imperfections, whether it be challenging constitutional law or other aspects of law. My feeling is we're going to be doing a lot of repair work come next session. I'm happy to work on this, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't put it in the bill now to assure that these funds are focused on what LCCMR and what these funds from the lottery are supposed to be focused on. If you see the language that's going on the ballot, we're making it very clear to citizens what they're voting for, that these funds would be focused on these things, and the language of the amendment really reflects the language of the constitutional change, and therefore I believe it's important that this language be included. And I again ask members to vote green. And Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call.
Representative Torkelson requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote on the A10 amendment. Is there any further discussion? Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Torkelson. I'm a little shocked saying there's no accountability when we were just in committee and there were several members of your side of the aisle that commended us on the accountability measures and the fiscal responsibility measures that are included in this bill. We have a clawback provision, a reporting provision. We worked really hard with the Department of Natural Resources to make sure that we are being as fiscally responsible as possible with this money. One thing I will note is if you look at the original Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund language, it might be the LCCMR language, I'm sorry. It actually has a similar provision to what you're suggesting, but it does leave out the word positive. It says measurable results. And so that's really what I'm trying to get at, is we can show results from this, but I think the word positive is an unnecessary qualifier that doesn't actually get at the heart of what we're trying to do with this funding, which much of it is research, and research doesn't have positive or negative results, it just has results. That's a fundamental aspect of science, and it's something that is very important to me as a former researcher, and it's something that I think we would not want to codify, saying that there needs to be positive results when we can't necessarily determine when a result is positive or negative. So again, I would ask for a no vote, but I understand where you're coming from, and you truly do have my guarantee that I will work on this with you. This is not going into effect, if it passes, until 2025, and so we have time to do this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, I don't need to repeat myself, but there's nothing wrong with putting this language in at this time. It assures us that we're headed in the right direction. I'm happy to continue working on it, as is the author of the bill, but there's no reason we shouldn't put this in to make sure we start down the right path. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
The clerk will take the roll on the A10 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail and the A10 amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended.
Third reading, House File number 1900, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to House File 1900 as amended. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, it is so fitting that on Statehood Day, we are discussing a bill that will fund and enhance something that we all know makes us special, our environment. And just like our environment, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund is special, which is why every member should vote green today to keep these special programs going that are present in each of our communities. When the ENRTF was created in 1988, Minnesota led the nation in meaningful conservation and natural resources management. For one of, if not the first times in U.S. history, voters came together to set aside and dedicate state funds for the protection of our environment. In doing so, a generation of Minnesotans decided to pass on that tradition of stewardship to their children. And with House File 1900, we have the chance to do the same and carry that torch to our children. By passing this bill, the wonderful work of the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota's Resources, or LCCMR, can continue to allocate proceeds from our lottery unchanged. The goal of the ENRTF is simple. It's an opportunity to safeguard long-term consistent funding for our environment from short-term mindset of our politics. And over 3 decades and 3 landside constitutional amendments, Minnesota voters have helped achieve that goal. Since its creation, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund has provided over $900 million for over 1,800 natural resource projects across our state, reaching every single county in Minnesota. The trust fund has protected our state from invasive species, funding research and management programs, addressing emerald ash borer, aquatic invasives, agriculture pests, plant and animal diseases, and more. The trust fund has also protected our state's natural areas and habitats. It has funded public, private, and nonprofit habitat conservation and preserving, restored, and enhanced our wetlands, lakes, prairies, forests, and rivers. This work includes projects like the Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plants and Pest Center at the University of Minnesota, which helps our state create better management policies on natural and agricultural lands. This work includes projects like our local parks, trails, natural area grant programs, and funding grants for local recreation and conservation in communities from St. Joseph to St. Paul, Prior Lake to Crane Lake, Minneapolis to Marshall, and War Road to Winona. The trust fund has protected our ability to use and enjoy the great outdoors, funding environmental education, naturalist courses, and accessible recreation infrastructure so we can all play outside. This work includes projects that I love and I know that you all love too, like the Voyageurs National Park and Boundary Waters Area Canoe Access resources, so all of us can go outside and enjoy these treasures that people from across the country are so envious of. One project near and dear to my heart and my home that was funded recently by the ENRTF was the reintroduction of endangered and native mussels to the Mississippi River here in northeast Minneapolis. Mussels are critical for our aquatic ecosystems as they filter water and restore our native natural and restore our actual stream bed that our Mississippi River had before it was changed by industry. It also creates habitat for other native fish, plants, and animals. My community in Minneapolis was a very industrial area, but now that river has been closed by the closure of the Locken Dam. So thanks to the ENRTF and thanks to the voters of Minnesota, we now have a beautiful and restored riverbed for every Minnesotan to enjoy. These projects are vital to our environment, our communities, and our constituents. They matter for the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the parks we play in. And these projects will continue when we pass House File 1900 and when our voters overwhelmingly approve this amendment next year. I'm also excited by the prospect of these community grants for an additional 1.5% of the trust fund going towards expanding access for these projects across Minnesota. Like so many of you, I have heard from organizations that have a really hard time applying for these grants. And by setting aside these community grants, we know that we can expand this access so that people who have never had an opportunity to benefit from the great outdoors can continue to do so. I'm also excited to know that the LCCMR process, which has recommended these ENRTF projects for decades, will continue to receive 5.5% of the trust fund every year, carrying on that important tradition of conservation. This is a good bill that expands and maintains our stewardship of the places we love. And when this fund was put on the ballot in 1988, the vote was unanimous. So let's have another green vote today as the president of Minnesota on our state's 155th birthday. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I get up to support the renewal. And thank you, Leader Hollins, for working on this. It's so important for Minnesota. Just able to do amazing work with these funds in the natural and environmental resources area. As was just mentioned, it's amazing. 1,800 projects through the last few years. I think this year there was 85 projects. And I was glad that Leader Hollins mentioned, I was lucky to serve on this 2 years, and it was, and what she mentioned is so true. There was projects that you wouldn't normally fund, but really make a lot of sense. I remember there was one, for example, a project that worked with, I think it was Mounds View kids, something with getting turtles, across the street. It sounds like not important. You probably wouldn't fund it in other ways, but it was working with the kids, and I thought it was really a great way to fund it with these lottery proceeds. And I remember at the same time there was an energy project, because there's believe it or not, there's a problem in Minnesota with cattails, invasive cattails, and one of the projects went after that, and it tried to turn through the University of Minnesota, and was going to try to turn that into energy. And actually, I should look into it to see how that went. I'm kind of quite curious. But there's just examples of that are really great projects that you wouldn't really fund in traditional ways, and this makes a lot of sense, really it does. There's, this fund, works so well with the other funds that we work on. The environmental bill, as that comes through this body, does a lot of these outdoor work. So does the Capital Investment Committee. And so, of course, as the chair of the legacy, there's a lot of synergy with the work that we do. And so it's great use of these lottery funds, and I think it's great. Thank you, Leader Hollins, for working on this. It's so important for Minnesota, and it's definitely making for a better Minnesota, and I appreciate it if you would consider voting green on this.
Further discussion, House File 1900. I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I have a couple of comments I wanted to make, maybe a couple questions, but I'm going to not go back to committee. I have a feeling I know how that would go, but there are a number of things that do need to be discussed today. The positives, we've heard a few of those. I have a few of those stories of my own. I've served on the LCCMR for previously 2 terms, another term again now, and I've carried the LCCMR bill in the past. I do know the typical projects that are there, and some of them that are close to my own district that I've worked on and supported, like the Loon Center in Cross Lake, that's moving forward, and there's a lot of value there for Minnesotans who are looking for something, not just in one small area of the state, but quite honestly, all across the state. There's been projects that have benefited probably every one of our districts. There is an unfortunate side of this discussion today, and Representative Hollins, you made a comment earlier, I'm going to bring it back for the discussion, that there's been a change to the renewal that will stop future raids for wastewater. And I want to talk about that for a minute. And anybody that's at home, take notes maybe. This might help you understand some of the minutia that's in legislation as it comes to the legislature and what it might mean. And this issue particularly is quite interesting to me because right now in our Constitution, as it was previously passed, it starts out, a permanent environment and natural resources trust fund is established in the state treasury. Loans may be made for up to 5% of the principal of the fund for water system improvements as provided by law. That's not in this renewal today, Representative Hollins, and I know you know that. I'm just mentioning this for the benefit of the body, and like I said, anybody that might be watching at home. Why wouldn't that be there? I think that comment earlier that we heard, we're going to stop future raids for wastewater, is the impetus behind that. That's my opinion. That's maybe somebody else has a different opinion. They'd like to change or challenge that. But it does need to be pointed out that when Minnesotans are polled about the environment, natural resources area, the number one subject of concern for them is clean water. And maybe we've forgotten those that were in a position to renew this, carrying the legislation or on a conference committee or in committees as this has been moving through the process. I've mentioned it a number of times. I'm not sure why it hasn't been taken more seriously, but maybe some have forgotten that every day in Minnesota, millions of gallons of cleaned, not perfectly cleaned, but cleaned wastewater is discharged into tributaries around the state of Minnesota. That includes the Mississippi and numerous others. As I'm looking across the room, I see most members are buried in their phones as I'm having to mention this today. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Representative Fraser. Why can't we continue to allow Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund money to be used as the Constitution currently states? That would be my question. I have to ask that today, and I'm befuddled as to why, when Minnesotans' number one concern could be addressed in this new language, Representative Hollins, that is not happening. It's being pushed to the side because we have to stop future raids for wastewater. And I understand there's a discussion about where might be the most appropriate way to fund some of these projects as it relates to wastewater infrastructure around the state. But this is one tool that could be used, and that's being taken away. A tool that could address Minnesotans' number one priority. That's my comments today, and I wish that I could be voting yes today. I guess I'm still somewhat undecided, but I'm probably going to be a no for this reason, because we've missed an opportunity. Yeah, I'm sorry, Representative Lilly. I know you were holding out hope, but we've missed an opportunity again. Democrats, for some reason, are ignoring this this issue, I think that Minnesotans believe front and center, when polled, number one issue, clean water, could be addressed in this renewal of the ENRTF, and that's not happening today.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Nicollet, Representative Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise today to show my support for this renewal of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund as well, because I think this is really critical for the future of our state. I think it's really important that we're having this discussion on Statehood Day, but I think it's really important that we have this conversation in a way that also highlights the environmental research that's been accomplished as a result of this legislation over the years, the amount of restorations and habitat improvements that have happened over the course of years, but also a better understanding of our natural world. And I know an awful lot of people travel to this state every year to take advantage of that, and we have an environmental legacy to hold near and dear to our hearts, and this helps to continue with that. I just wanted to say thank you to the author of the bill for working so hard on this legislation. I think it's been a couple of years of work, and I really wanted to highlight that. Thank you for doing this. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize the initial trailblazers in this legislation back in 1988 rather. Willard Munger and Dave Bishop worked diligently to get this to the finish line. And that started something in 1988 that we have to this day. Now, I'm a millennial. I was born in the early 80s. This is all I've ever known. And there are people across the state of Minnesota who have only ever known the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And I think that that's really important. And I think that goes and highlights the importance of this legislation, but also what this body can do to make a difference in people's lives. The last thing I wanted to say is that I think if the people at home that are watching this tonight, this debate, but more importantly, when they go to the ballot box, if these folks renew this piece of legislation, it'll go on to 2050. And that'll produce a lot of new projects, a lot of great projects. I was just looking at the 2024 request for proposals, and I'll tell you, there is a lot of great requests this year. And I know that the folks that are in the discussion on who's going to get the funding is going to really have a hard time. I personally know a couple of people that are friends and acquaintances that have research projects, and I know that these research projects are actually going to have a great impact on our understanding of Minnesota, but also the protection of our natural resources. And so I rise today, and I wanted to highlight one last thing. There's a letter that we all got, and there are a number of organizations that I belong to, a number of organizations that I respect for their work across the state of Minnesota, and I wanted to highlight that they are also saying today, please vote green, just like I plan to do. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I had the opportunity to hear this bill twice because it came through Ways and Means, so we had kind of a different discussion in there, and then the Rules Committee. So there's something that we haven't really talked a whole lot about on this floor, and so I thought I would have a little dialogue with Representative Hollins if she'd be willing. So the one part of this that is completely new that we haven't talked about at all is the community grants. And I wanted to start talking about the Community Grants Advisory Council because it's brand new and it's going to be stood up, and it does have 11 members. And so I'm wondering if Representative Hollins would yield to a question, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hollins will yield to a question. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Hollins, starting in line 4.20 of the bill, maybe I'm sure you've got it in front of you, if you could just let the body know who those 11 members of the new Community Grants Advisory Council will be. That I believe they're going through the grant proposals is their job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative O'Neill. I'm not sure how to answer the question, but there are 11 residents of Minnesota that would make up the advisory council. They haven't yet been decided, so I don't know who they will be.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, it wasn't a trick question. It's right here. It just says 2 members from the Ojibwe tribe, 2 members from the Dakota tribe, 4 members who identify as Black, African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Pacific Islander, or as a member of a community of color. That makes up 8 of the 10. I was just getting it on the record that that's who is the new advisory council. So 8 of the 10 are the ones I just described. And I know when we discussed this in Rules Committee, Representative Hollins, we had asked the DNR, maybe it was even in Ways and Means, but anyway, we had asked the DNR what happens after the advisory council reviews all of the applications. And if Representative Hollins would yield for a question, if you could let us know what the DNR said.
Representative Hollins will yield to another question. The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. So you want to know what the DNR said about what happens afterwards, after they review? I mean, I think they said that, I'm trying to remember exactly what the DNR said, but my recollection is that there is the advisory council that will be created and that will work with the DNR to review and assess where these, how the funds should be set up, what the allocations will be, and a lot of the details of the grant program will be worked out between the DNR and this advisory committee. Does that seem correct?
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hollins. Yes, and so they weren't quite sure because I hadn't put all the pieces together, which sometimes happens when we set up a new program, but it will be patterned after, similar to what you just said. And then I think Representative Nadeau really had some interesting points, and he was reading specifically from the bill starting in line 3.16. And he was talking about another change in the bill, which is the prioritization of these grants. And so, again, these are the community grants. This is all brand new. We've never done this before, so I thought we should have a conversation about the community grants. And Representative Nadeau talked a lot about that priority. In fact, he read some of those things into the record. These are things that we also discussed in both of those committees. And, you know, it has things like disproportionately affected by ag loss, building loss, risk of fire, low income, high energy cost, rate of asthma, rate of diabetes, rate of heart disease, low life expectancy, high housing cost, lack of green space, lack of indoor plumbing, presence of lead paint, proximity to hazardous waste and related facilities, particulate matter exposure, unemployment. There's a few other things too. And Representative Hollins, if she will yield for another question.
Representative Hollins will yield. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Hollins, I'm just wondering, we had talked about this briefly in committee, and it seemed to me as I was reading that paragraph, and Representative Nadeau said the same thing, like, how do you get that information? Like, how do you determine where the high priority areas are that this advisory council will now prioritize the applications coming in?
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Yes, so that priority criteria is criteria that was developed using census tract information collected by the U.S. Census Bureau. And it's assembled in a screening tool. There's actually a website I've got access to right here. And we actually went ahead and used the website to find some of these areas. And they include Worthington, Grand Portage, Carlstead, Harmony, Redwood Falls, Waite Park, Brainerd, Blaine, Shakopee, and right here in St. Paul. So there are hundreds of these communities that fall into this criteria all across the entire state.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hollins. It was just really interesting to try to pair up all of the different parameters with how you're going to actually turn that into making choices and prioritization. And the last thing, if she would yield to one other question, is...
She will yield, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. And Representative Hollins, we did talk about the amount of money we're talking about for community grants. And we had nonpartisan staff kind of talk about, if you remember, kind of what the whole fund had appropriated in the last appropriation year, and then what she thought would be proportional to that. And I'm wondering if you have those notes in front of you as well.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Yes, so I brought more information because I told you I can't do math. So if the voters approve the constitutional amendment in 2024, the new appropriation of 1.5% of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund market value will go towards the community grant program. So the current market value of the trust fund is $1.488 billion. So 1.5% of the market value is roughly $22 million.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, she had mentioned it was 79 million, and of the community grant, she thought it'd be about 23 million, so 22 million is right in there. So that's good math, Representative Hollins. Appreciate that very much. So yeah, between 22 and 23 million is probably what will go into these community grants. Again, that's why I think we should have that conversation on the floor. We did have it in committee and get that on the record since nobody else was talking about that. And the last thing I would say, I'm not going to ask her to yield, but the last thing I would say is that in the testifiers that came in the Rules Committee, there were a couple phrases that came up over and over and over again, and that was environmental justice and social justice. And yet those words do not appear when you look at page 2.6 through 2.10, when it actually has the language of what's going to be on the ballot. And I know, Representative Hollins, you said that this language was polled, and it polled the best of why it would pass. But it doesn't say anywhere in the language, members, anything about environmental or social justice. And yet that was something that we discussed here on the floor. It was something discussed in committee. And so I think that that is important for members of the public to know, too, that these additional community grants, which will be 22 to 23 million every year, and you heard what the composition of that advisory council will be and what areas that it would cover. It does not say anything about environmental justice or social justice in the ballot question. So I personally will be a no for that reason, because I think there's a little bit more work to be done on this, including what Representative Torkelson tried to amend on. And so I appreciate your time today, and thank you, Representative Hollins, for answering all the questions.
Further discussion, House File 1900. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I'd ask you to vote yes for this amendment, this constitutional amendment. And it's not that often that we actually get constitutional amendments to change our Constitution to consider. And it's also very important when we are considering changing the Constitution that we provide some intent, that the author provides some intent. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the author of House File 1900 if she would yield for some questions.
She will yield for a question, Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hollins, what is your intent? What is the purpose of the Environmental Trust Fund?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. This is an important aspect of this trust fund, and I want to make sure that it is on the record. So the assets of the fund shall be appropriated by law for the public purpose of protection, conservation, preservation, and enhancement of the state's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. That has been very consistent in this constitutional amendment. It's been a part of the constitutional language, and it continues to be a part of it now. Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker, if Representative Hollins would yield for another question.
She will yield, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hollins. So it is a public purpose that is your intent to have not private profit, not private enhancement, not personal enhancement, but a public purpose. Is that correct?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is correct, a public purpose, and we understand that many of the projects that are funded through this have a longer term public purpose where we are looking at things over the course of years at times. And so it's really important that we have this as a constitutional amendment because it can't be subject to the wills of, the changing legislative environment.
Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hollins, if she'd yield for another question.
She will yield, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hollins, is research a public purpose? Scientific inquiry, looking at research, is that a public purpose? As the author, is that your intent?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Absolutely. I think research falls squarely into the area of public purpose.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if she would yield for one last question.
She will yield for one last question, Representative Hansen.
And Mr. Speaker and members, this is actually a very important question because it is something that has confused the legislature since we passed the legacy amendment, and that is the difference between substitution and supplement. And so on line 3, and this, although this is in the community grant program, I think it's important for overall, where it talks about on lines 3.28, 3.29, and 3.30, that the money appropriated should supplement traditional sources of funding rather than being used as a substitute. If Representative Hollins would yield to answer that question as the author.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hansen. Yes, that is correct. It actually, this is something I wanted to bring up anyhow, so I'm going to talk about it. So in 2018, when the funds were rated for wastewater treatment plants, it actually was brought to a lawsuit because of the supplement, not supplant language that is in the constitutional amendment, and they found that it did violate that, and so we needed to refund the money that was taken out for that purpose, which is why we have amended it to not have the wastewater treatment. But in general, the idea is to supplement and not supplant.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, these questions are important because they provide the foundation when we ask the voters to consider this. And the discussion tonight has been looking at some of the grant programs, how we distribute the money, some of the conditions, and I think we even talked about where and how. But the core of this is the trust fund. A trust. The trust. To trust that that fund will be used properly. And Representative Hollins has done a great job as the author here in defining what the trust is so that we can have trust that this money, no matter whether it's spent in the community grant program or through the traditional LCCMR, has to meet the Constitution requirement. And the Constitution language has that trust in it. The question from the voters defines that a little more, but the foundation is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And I think that's the key in this. We're asking for your trust. Voters provided that a number of years ago. I think this is valuable to go to the voters again and ask for your support tonight and for the support of the voters.
Further discussion of House File 1900. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, members. Thank you for the robust discussion. I truly appreciate it. One thing I wanted to highlight, because I think a lot of individuals don't necessarily recognize the name Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and maybe they don't realize that this is bringing things to their own communities. So I wanted to highlight a couple of recent projects. Over $500,000 in Representative Hidela's district to reintroduce bison into Spring Lake Park Preserve. $2.7 million to rehabilitate the Mustinka River in Representative Backer's district. More than $200,000 to Representative Baker's district, where the U of M and White Earth Tribal Community Colleges investigated the potential of antibacterial microorganisms in bog soil, which sounds pretty cool. $326,000 in Representative Agbaje's district to address bacterial blooms and toxins that contaminate drinking water and lead to fish mortality. $288,000 to Representative Torkelson's district to help farmers adapt conservation practices to improve soil health. And millions of dollars spent in the districts of Representative Damuth, Representative Doubt, Representative Liebling, and Representative Zalesnikar to build accessible fishing piers so that everyone can enjoy our 10,000 lakes. As you can see, this trust fund is critical to communities all across the state. And with the addition of the Community Grants Program, we can ensure that all Minnesotans, regardless of their background or socioeconomic status, get to experience the benefits from our wonderful, great outdoors. I hope that you can all vote yes on this very important piece of legislation, and I look forward to seeing a green board. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 1900. The clerk will close the roll. There being 87 ayes and 41 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 197. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 197, number 3 on the calendar for the day, a resolution memorializing Congress to resolve that the requirements have been met to ratify the ERA, the first engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Bahner, to explain House File 197.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. House File 197 proposes a federal resolution to Congress to acknowledge that the requirements have been met to ratify the ERA as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The amendment itself is quite simple and really quite elegant. It states equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The federal resolution acknowledges that the conditions of Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution have been satisfied. Specifically, Article 5 provides 2 basic requirements. First, it must be ratified by a 2/3 majority of Congress. That was accomplished in 1972. Second, it must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. As of today, 38 of 50 states have ratified the ERA. The law states it shall take effect 2 years from final ratification. That occurred on January 27th, 2 years ago. We are already 1 year past. That date having passed, we ask Congress to act in accordance with the law and acknowledge the ERA as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This bill consistently has wide bipartisan votes among voters. You will be getting a handout with some information. I have actually several polls, but I wanted to just give you one for today. But what it shows, members, is that we see that voters overwhelmingly believe not only that equality should be the law of the land, but that it's time to make it happen. And with that, members, I urge you to vote green on the bill.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading.
3rd reading, House File number 197.
3rd reading. Discussion of House File 197. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I don't think former Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was incompetent, and she has public statements about the expiration. So I just think you need to do the research and see what former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said on this topic.
Discussion of House File 197. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sitting over here chuckling a little bit because I think that only Minnesota Democrats can take a widely bipartisan issue and turn it into something completely partisan, unworkable, and frankly, downright silly. It's incredibly frustrating. But I would like to address a couple of the things, frankly, Representative Quam just mentioned. Representative Quam, good news, I've got some quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg to address this. But you know, it's interesting. What should just be a really simple resolution? We support the U.S. Equal Rights Amendment. That would be a really simple resolution, and I suspect most of us would vote for it. But instead, this resolution goes on for 2.5 pages and throws in all kinds of silliness and absurdities. And one, it has to start, they actually have to say this because frankly, it's not true. Whereas, well, actually, I should say, we're mincing words. Whereas no time limit exists within the text of the proposed amendment that was ratified. Okay, Congress literally put a time limit on it. They extended the time limit once, but the time limit was June 30th, 1982. Congress put that time limit on it. We didn't. In fact, Minnesota ratified it. But Congress put a time limit on it. And that time limit was 40 years past by the time the final state ratified. The other thing that is kind of cute in the language of this resolution, whereas, I like this one, they have to try to justify again, whereas in 1868, the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution despite 2 states purporting to rescind the ratification. They of course, had to add that because 5 states have rescinded. And just on these 2 issues particularly, this is what Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to say. She said, I would like to see a new beginning. I'd like it to start over. There's too much controversy, she said. She said, if you count a latecomer on the plus side, how can you disregard states that said, we've changed our minds? This is from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, many times over, said that the congressionally imposed deadline was problematic. And that actually we don't have the authority to just override that. And the new Congress doesn't have the authority to just override that. And by her own words, the Supreme Court would even not have the authority to override that that congressionally imposed deadline. So, I mean, it makes me giggle a little bit that the Democrats actually put this stuff into the resolution, knowing that it's problematic, and even probably one of the greatest advocates for women that has ever walked this earth agrees with us on this, that it is problematic. And you know, the other thing, obviously, that is really problematic, not to mention, it's just no longer about women. This is no longer about women. And I'll tell you what, I spend as much time as probably anybody in this chamber fighting for women, but that's not what this is about anymore. This is a really easy no vote. I mean, again, this particular resolution is just silly. So, I don't know, vote how you want. It's a resolution. Nobody has to vote on a resolution at all. I think somebody said that, I mean, this has as much meaning as wishing Biden happy birthday or whatever. I mean, it's pretty meaningless, but this resolution is partisan, it's not really workable, and it's downright silly.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Bahner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to address very briefly, before my closing remarks, that when we talk to the courts, the highest law of the land, the final arbiter, is the United States Constitution itself. And anyone who's read Article 5 will know there are 2 things that were just discussed here that are glaringly missing. One, there is no provision, I mean none, that allows for an expiration of any amendment. And in fact, the 27th Amendment was ratified 202 years and 7 months after its introduction. Now, surely, if we can have a amendment that can go to almost 203 years, I think we can give women's rights a few years to make it happen. And I think that's justified. I also want to talk about recession. It is very clear that there is no mechanism under Article 5 for recession either, to be quite frank. And in fact, if we look at court precedent, we would find that there is absolutely no precedent for that in the Constitution. And in fact, the 14th Amendment, which is, by the way, part of the U.S. Constitution right now, today, New Jersey and Ohio attempted to withdraw their support. This attempt, however, was unsuccessful. Specifically, it was noted that Article 5 of the Constitution speaks only to the state's power to ratify the amendment, but not to the power to rescind a ratification. All precedents concerning state recessions of ratifications indicate that such actions are not valid, and that the constitutional amendment process, as described in Article 5, allows only for ratification. For example, the official tally of ratifying states for the 14th Amendment in 1868 by both the Secretary of State and Congress includes New Jersey and Ohio, states which had passed a resolution to rescind their ratification. It also includes in the tally where North Carolina and South Carolina, states which originally rejected and then later ratified the amendment. In the course of promulgating the 14th Amendment, therefore, Congress determined that both attempted withdrawal of the ratifications and the previous rejections prior to ratification had no legal validity. Let me read that again. Congress determined that both attempted withdrawals of the ratification and previous rejections prior to the ratification had no legal validity. And in fact, to be clear, the 14th Amendment is currently in the Constitution. It should also be worth noting here today that of all 27 of the amendments to the United States Constitution currently in force, not one ever had an expiration placed on it. The only one that had an expiration placed on it were women's rights. I want that to sink in for folks, because it is here that we have to understand the very, very core of this issue is that expiration dates we already know are movable. We already know that because Congress has already done it. They've already established that precedent. It's also worth noting that in terms of legal precedent, that this was intentionally not put into the body of the amendment. It was put in the preamble. The preamble gave Congress a great deal of flexibility. But it also is interesting to note that from a legal perspective, that when it goes into the preamble, first of all, that there is no legal precedent that establishes the preamble as a source of law, and therefore, it is unenforceable by many constitutional scholars who have looked into this issue. Many go so far as to suggest that Congress lacks the authority to impose deadlines on ratification, as no such allowance is made under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Further, after the Nevada ratification in 2017, a white paper was produced for Congress to determine if the deadline excluded ERA from inclusion in the U.S. Constitution. It concluded that this was not valid and allowed for the ratifications. But that said, members, now that we've cleared up a few of those distinctions, I wanted to start with just grounding us here today and thanking everyone here today for the fact that we are here to wish happy birthday to the state of Minnesota. That there are many incredible things happening in this chamber today. And I'm proud to stand in this chamber today. It is the most diverse chamber in our history. We have more women. We have more members of every race, religion, creed, and ethnicity in this body. Today we have an opportunity to come together and to boldly declare that equality under the highest law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, should be reality for every Minnesotan and for every citizen. Sadly, we know this is not the case. We have seen in recent years erosions of our rights and freedoms. The promise of America was built on the ideal of freedom, promised to all, but realized by a select few. Supreme Court Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously quoted Sarah Moore Grimke, a 19th century abolitionist and women's rights activist. She said before the court, "I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks." Members, women are tired. Women are weary. They are tired of waiting their turn for the full promise of rights and freedoms, for basic equality under the law. American women have fought for hundreds of years, have fought and scraped for every small privilege. The right not to be the property of another, the right to inherit, the right to vote, the right to financial freedom, to take out a loan, a credit card, a mortgage, without their husband's permission. We fight for justice in this very chamber every day. For the laws to protect us. We fight for the laws to protect us from violence, to bring swift justice, not justice delayed or justice that never comes. We fought for the right to die for our country, to be healers and faith leaders, to be leaders in our community, leaders in the halls of government. We stand today on the shoulders of giants, generations of women who came before us, women who knew the sting of oppression deep, deep in their bones, who felt injustice at its core. Women who planted trees in whose shade they would never see. They planted seeds for generations yet to come. With steadfast determination that future generations would not have less rights or freedoms than they toiled to win. But I find hope in this resolution today. It brings with it justice. It brings with it an opportunity for us to lift up one another, men and women. For if one of us is not equal in the eyes of the law, none of us are truly free. The time has passed to ponder and to pontificate. The time to act is now. With this federal resolution, we have the power to restore the dream of freedom and of equality under the law, to make it a shared destiny for all. In closing, the words of Lyndon B. Johnson, "We have talked long enough in this country about equal rights, 100 years or more. It is time to write the next chapter, and time to write it in the books of law." And with that, members, I urge you to vote green.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I don't need a piece of paper to tell me that I have equal rights. Women already have equal rights in this state. Women already have equal rights in this nation. I urge you to vote no. I'm sorry, but I think this is a silly resolution. It's not needed. We have equal rights. I stand on that. I don't need a piece of paper to tell me that. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Bahner yield to a question?
Representative Bahner, she will not yield. Representative Franson.
Okay, well, Mr. Speaker here, I am trying to decide if I want to vote yes for the bill or for the resolution or no for the resolution. And Representative Bahner is the author of the resolution, so therefore I am curious to see why Representative Bahner would not want to answer a question that's related to the resolution she would like passed, and I'm assuming with bipartisan support. So I will ask once again, would Representative Bahner yield to a question?
Representative Bahner, will you yield to a question? She will yield. Representative Franson.
Thank you, Representative Bahner. So as I stated, I assume that you would like bipartisan support on this resolution here. So could you describe for the body what your definition of a woman is? Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bahner.
Thank you for that question. I will tell you that the definitions around sex and gender have already been determined by the Supreme Court. They were determined under the Bostock decision, as well as I believe it was Zelenda and Stevens. And they used as the foundation for that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and determined that those two terms are interchangeable and can have a more broad definition, particularly when it comes to discrimination.
Representative Franson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think you have it. Representative Bahner cannot describe to the body what a woman is, and therefore my vote will be no. Thank you.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, there's been a little bit of discussion, as we've heard both from the Democrats and the description of this resolution, and you've heard from the Republicans and some thoughts and opinions on that. One thing that I do agree with, as the resolution author had mentioned, I'm not asking anyone to yield, but as she had mentioned in her description, that women have fought over years. And there is a historic number of women serving in this chamber. Also, there was a whole description there. But I have to tell you that women have fought to be in this chamber. Men have fought to be in this chamber. And I don't think we need the words of a resolution to define or describe what equal rights are. I am proud to stand here in this chamber, and it doesn't take the words on a page to let me know that the battles that were fought over time by my grandmother, my mother, my grandfather, my father, I don't need any description like that to let me know that I have equal rights. I am here to serve my constituents. I am here to serve the state of Minnesota. I believe that is all our intent of all of us sitting here. I will be voting no on this, and I fully know that we have done everything possible to get us into this chamber right now and serve this state in the best way possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the author. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Katiza Wattoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to support this resolution today. Now there's been some discussion about the definition of men, definition of women. Women know what it's like to be other than, because we were not included in our Constitution originally. And that's why we need to pass this amendment. There are other people in this body who are descendants of slaves, and black people they were not included in our original Constitution, and we passed an amendment saying that they have those rights. This is about equal rights for everyone, period. And if you vote red, you're voting against that.
Further discussion of House File 197. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Bahner.
Thank you, members, for the discussion. I just want to point out that I appreciate what folks have said here today. And perhaps some folks in this room do feel equal today. But here's the reality. Based on the law, you are not. Currently, women are the only unprotected class in the United States Constitution. That is a fact. And that can be looked up quite easily. You don't need to take my word for it. You can read the document for yourself. We've had numerous legal court cases that have gone forward that have challenged this information. But the reality is, it's been made quite plain that women didn't have that ability. We do not have equal rights provided under the Constitution. Why does that matter? Why does it matter if we're not equal in the eyes of the law? Well, it matters because we have this patchwork of elaborate laws that we put together to protect ourselves from violence, for voting, to inherit. By the way, did you know that the first rights that we were granted on being able to own property, they weren't magnanimous. That wasn't to actually give rights to women. It was designed as a way to shelter assets, not to give women more rights. I think it's worth bearing note to the fact that at every turn, for hundreds of years, women have asked to be included. We're the United States of America. We've been given this promise of rights, freedoms, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and yet there is nowhere in that document in which women are represented. Not one space. It should be noted, too, that even within the bounds of our own state, we have a Constitution, too. Our head Supreme Court Justice is Laura Gilday. She upholds the contents of that document every day, even though she is not represented among its pages. Why does it matter if women are equal? I don't know about you, but I don't like the laws on the books. We are lawmakers. We understand the importance of the law. I do not like the feeling that young women can roll the dice with the courts. And at best, they have a 50-50 shot at whether or not the law will be upheld. I don't know about you members, but I don't like the idea of my rights and freedoms having a 50% chance of actually being upheld. That's why it matters, people. That is why it matters. That's why it should matter to everyone on this floor. And we could dive into the definitions of intermediate scrutiny versus strict scrutiny and how that plays out. But anybody here who's ever placed a bet would know that I want to know that I have a better than 50% shot that someone's going to uphold the law. That the law is going to protect my rights and freedoms, the rights and freedoms of the next generation, my young nieces who are about to graduate, and Isabella, who sits with me on the floor every day on my desk. Isabella is 6 and she can't be here tonight because it's close to her bedtime. But when I think about equal rights and freedoms, I don't want to take your word for it. I don't want to take anyone's word for it. I want it in writing. And so should every woman in this room. Our rights are non-negotiable. Our freedoms are non-negotiable. The erosions we've seen of late do not give me great comfort. But you know what would give me great comfort? Seeing it in writing. In writing, in the U.S. Constitution, the highest law of the land. And with that, members, vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 197.
Can we get Peter?
I'm sorry. They're just such assholes. I was like, green, green, green. No, I didn't want you to have to lean over. Well, I don't want to. I'm sorry. I took your vote away.
I don't care. I really, literally don't care.
Okay, good.
Everyone's
Well,
like,
some
this
people
is the
do.
most important part of your job is pushing the button. If you think that's the most important part of my job, you don't understand how this place works.
Members, please vote.
Yes. The baby's going to be the whole time. It's sweet.
Have all members who wish to vote voted?
Oh, yeah. I already squeezed.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 51 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. I recognize the member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move a recess to the call of the Speaker and note that we will have a small group of members staying to receive messages from the Senate, but won't be taking up any other bills tonight.
Any other announcements before recess? Representative Long moves a recess to the call of the Speaker unless there are any other announcements. Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Long's motion to recess, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the House stands in recess.